So I know I typically say this in these videos, but for this episode of The Forge, I want to start off just by saying the stuff we're going to look at today, I would pay very little attention to the actual hard numbers, while they're probably still like good estimates or starting points. More so than ever, this episode is going to be like the embodiment of the rough draft, right? Like I typically say that, for the Forge and for this series, that these are always ideas, these are rough drafts, and if I was actually designing cards, then they would be tested and refined and so forth. And that is definitely the case with this one, because this is going to be really like a complex idea, and it's the sort of thing that in my mind you just would not be able to really nail down without like some game testing. So for this video, try not to pay too much attention to the numbers, and then I'm going to talk about the card. So that normally I have at least like 3 cards for these videos, but this time it's a single card because again it's a really complex idea. And then after we talk about the idea, at the end I also want to talk about some different ways that I could see the card existing, because again this is more so than usual for this series, like a really rough draft idea, and even some like core basics of the card I could envision changing. So without further ado, I had an idea a while back that I really wanted to bring something to the game that I felt was at least iconic, or that I enjoyed from the Elder Scrolls games, that did not currently exist in the game. And as such, I wanted to take a crack at the idea of introducing the Altar of Spellmaking. So if you've played Oblivion or some of the other games, you know that in previous Elder Scrolls games, though you couldn't do it in base Skyrim, there was even a mod that allowed you to do it in that as well. You were allowed to basically create like custom spells. And as somebody who usually gravitates towards spell casting classes when he plays high fantasy, because in my mind, why wouldn't I play the thing that I can't do in real life? Creating custom spells just really appeals to me. So the Altar of Spellmaking is my shot at making that happen. Now, first and foremost, we're going to just talk about the elephant in the room, right? This card does just say, activate, get a custom spell. That sounds an awful lot like a card you may recognize if you play Hearthstone, right? Kazakus. So, very much like Kazakus, this is going to be a situation where you are presented with some options, you make choices, and then at the end you get a custom spell. So, as we go through the process, though, there are some pretty key differences. So in my theory, or in my embodiment, you are still going to make 3 rounds of choices, but 1, this is a support card, it's an altar, you're going to get multiple uses. 2, the choices are always going to be the same. So unlike Kazakus, who is like a series of RNG choices, you pick the cost, but after that, the things that are presented to you are not always the same. These would always be like static in my mind, so you would know exactly like what custom spell you could create each time. And unlike the other ones, you don't necessarily pick the cost rate up front. For what I have envisioned, and you'll see here, the cost might fluctuate depending on the kind of spell you create, because certain effects are more powerful than others, and I really kind of like that idea. So, Altar of Spellmaking. It is obviously going to be a legend because it's going to be super complex, and it has the potential to provide a lot of card advantage, right? You'd basically be getting like 3 extra cards, potentially more depending on the effects. So I knew I wanted to make it a legend. As of right now, it's not set to be unique. Power level wise, I could certainly see the argument for it, but if you played Oblivion, for example, there were more than 1 Altar of Spellmaking in the world, so it didn't feel right making this be a unique card. So that is, I know I said we were going to talk about other ways I could envision the card later, but that is right out of the gate like one way that I could see this varying, right? I could very easily see an argument for this being a unique legendary because of power, or maybe you like name it, right? I don't know if in the lore, each altar of spellmaking had a unique name, so maybe this is one instance. I kind of think that would be cool, because then you could print other altars of spellmaking with different kinds of spells that you could create, and I think that that would be really fun and interesting. But yeah, I said I was going to talk about different variations at the end of the explanation, so we're going to jump right into how I would envision this card working. When creating a spell in Oblivion, players used to have to select a target, a duration, and a magnitude. The choices would then determine the magicka cost of the spell. So for our altar, we're going to have players select a target, an area when applicable, and then the effects of the spell. So each choice is going to impact the total cost of the custom spell, and each choice is going to be the same every time. So there's not going to be like an element of randomness to the choices. Some choices may not apply to every option, and thus they'll be skipped during the process. For example, one of the target choices is self, and when you're choosing yourself, there's no area necessary, you're the only target, so we're going to skip that part. So when activated, the target choices are presented first. The three options are self, creature, and support. And so if self is chosen, again, we skip the area and move directly to the effects. For the art here, I just used like Daedric runic alphabet, because it was going to be really hard to find art for each of these things. So if you're curious what that is, it's basically the words in the Daedric runic alphabet. So anyway, let's walk through the process of like if we had chosen self, right? So we choose self, we skip the area options, and then we go straight to the effects. So the three effects presented are, heal 5, summon a Frost Atronach in a random lane. I chose random lane just because even though I hate randomness, I didn't want it to be something where you had to, on cast of the spell, then also like choose the target where it goes. Normally these kind of like spells that summon something randomly either automatically go into both lanes, or it is random. And then the last choice is just to draw a card. So when these are presented, when you're choosing the effects, a player can actually choose any number before committing the final like decision of the spell. So there would be like a commit or an OK button, but a player could click on any number of effects and it would essentially put like a check mark, or maybe the symbol from mulliganing to determine or dictate, hey, these are the ones I'm adding to my spell. And then when you hit OK or you commit, then all of those effects are added, and then the total cost is then calculated and the spell is added to your hand. So for example, if somebody wanted to pick all three options here, they would then get a spell that has a total cost of 11. So again, as we look at the options, I just kind of want to note that the values are rough estimates and are not reflective of any sort of final balance attempt. Even as I'm sitting here recording this, I've already kind of pre-made the cards and I'm second guessing some of the values I've listed. I think 2 for draw might be a little too low. Maybe that needs to bump to 3, I don't know. But again, mostly I think these values would be really hard to settle on if you have not done any testing, and thus I haven't. This is entirely conceptual, so I just kind of want to reiterate that. Don't get hung up too much on the values, more like a core concept. So the one thing I do want to say is that I know for the costs that I would want the costs, or at least the effects costs, to be more than their normal counterparts, largely because the altar is generating up to 3 custom spells, and I also think the cost is due to be higher, for example, because of the flexibility offered. This card would essentially let you create custom spells that could fit any scenario, so you're kind of getting the perfect tool for the job every time if it's in play and you have the ability to react. So the convenience that that affords, combined with the ability to keep generating cards from this support card, means that they should cost more. So that's why, if you're wondering, for example, why for heal 5 I had 3, and you're thinking, well, geez, like heal potion is 2 and it has prophecy. Well, this is not a card in your deck though, right? Like this is something you're kind of getting almost for free, so it should be something that I think costs more than the normal effect. So that being said, we're going to back up and we're going to work through the process as if we had chosen creature this time. So for creature, we have single target lane or all, right? So when we pick creature, first of all, you're going to notice the cost goes up by 1, but that's because I think creature is the most desirable interaction, so that one gets kind of a bump in the cost just for choosing that target. But then when we choose creature, we're presented with our 3 choices for area, and again, that's single target, lane, or all. And then if we pick one, regardless of which one we pick, we now are presented with 4 choices, and the 4 choices are shackle, silence, deal 3 damage, or destroy. Now, I've kind of hemmed and hawed about whether I wanted to include destroy here, but I think we will for now. Again, just because it's like a rough concept, but just like before, in theory, you can choose any number of these. Now, obviously, if you're picking destroy, you probably don't want to pick the other ones, but I can see scenarios where, due to like magic cost reasons, you may pick like shackle and silence, or, you know, silence and then deal 3 damage, or, you know, so on and so forth, right? So I think that there are some, or even silence and destroy. I guess silence and destroy would work if you're trying to get rid of a last gasp, but I think that there are a lot of really cool ways that you could see these being applied to each of the area options. So again, single target, to an entire lane, or to everything on the board. I think that there are some pretty cool combos that are obvious from the choices here, and so I think it makes you know, interesting dynamic choices and fun spells with these options. So lastly, we're just going to go ahead and take a look at like the support options. So if we choose support, we are still presented with the area options, but you'll notice that lane does not show up, right? Because there are no supports really in a lane. I thought about doing left and right, but since you can't really control where they show up when you play the support, I felt like that was unfair. So for now, it's either single target support removal or all. It's worth noting that when I say all, I really do mean all. That's both sides. It's not like just the enemy, and the same for the creature stuff. But the effects for supports, right? So assuming that we pick, you know, one or all, still the same. Your choices are destroy, and then because there's only so many ways you can really interact with supports, I just went back to the well on draw and heal. I could buy an argument for maybe like reduce 1 charge or add 1 charge or kind of fun stuff like that, but for now, for simplicity, we're just going to go with draw and heal. So that's essentially the like options, the static options that I currently have envisioned for the card, though obviously I have more. Something like this is so complex and interesting, I could see it showing up a lot of different ways. So, you know, even though it's a rough draft idea, I think the core concept is just really fun and interesting. Now, I will say there's an obvious danger in terms of power level here, right? So real testing would absolutely be needed before implementation. But I think a card like this could be a plus for a number of reasons. First, choosing the right card at the right time with so many options available kind of adds a layer of skill. Not that I think it would be too hard to make those choices, but it's still a layer of choice, and anytime you present players with choices, I think that's good. Second, I like the idea of everything being static values and choices, because then it's not really reliant on RNG, and it also, at least in my opinion, I think it makes future balancing choices easier. So if the card is released and it is too strong, there's a lot of ways you can tweak this card because everything's static, right? You could adjust the actual cost of the card itself, you could adjust the cost of the components, you could tweak, you know, damage up or down, heal up or down. There is literally like a wide range of ways that this card could be tweaked or balanced in order to get it to be at the proper level, and so by sticking with the static values and choices, I think that it's easier to accomplish that. So last thing I want to touch on, and it's stuff I talked about it at the beginning of the video, but I just want to re-hit it. I think this card could exist in a couple of different ways. So right now it's neutral, but I could easily see this as an intelligence card, right? The Ultra Spellmaking is designed for magic users. Intelligence is like the attribute for magic users. I could totally see this as just being an int card. That being said, I kind of wanted to make it neutral because I feel like it would give some great tools to non-blue control decks, and I didn't want to shove everything there. Also, let's face it, I think the card's kind of cool, and I would want to see every archetype kind of play with it and experiment with it, and by limiting it to intelligence, you're kind of keeping some of those other players out. So there's a little bit of bias there. Also, I think the card could be made unique, like I said at the beginning. And I think in the preview image I might have even had it as be unique. Now I'm drawing a blank, but I think that it could be unique because of power level reasons, right? But I could also, if I remember right in the lore, there was more than one, so I could buy the argument for there being three. One argument against it being unique is that I think unique cards are always like named instances of things, like it's a person, it's a legendary weapon. And to my knowledge, there's not like named instances of altars. Not that Bethesda couldn't just name an altar for lore reasons, right? But right now, I don't think that we have one that stands out. So there is like, that piece to the whole unique, non-unique argument. I think it would be cool if they made it unique and then released maybe other unique ones, because then you could have different altars doing different things. Maybe they do make one that's intelligence, but then they make you an altar for each of the attributes. Like, who knows, right? The downside, though, is that obviously this is an incredibly complex card when it comes to balancing, so the more versions you have of this, the harder I think it's going to be to get everything right, so there is some danger there. But anyways, this is what's been rolling around my head for a while. I think it's a cool, again, core concept idea, so as always, I'd love to know what you guys think. If you think there are effects that should be in there that weren't. If you think that it's, something that you would play with, so on and so forth, right? Like, basically, I love it whenever you guys leave comments. I always read them all. I try to interact with them as best as I can as well, but I definitely always read them all, and I love hearing what you guys have to say, so, let me know. And as always, I will hope to catch you, next time. I really need to come up with a better outro, because I kind of don't know what to say. It's awkward. Like, I'm not really catching you next time, but I am, and I hope you come back. So, anyway, ignore the rant. Hope to see you next time, I guess. I guess we'll stick with that for now. And, yeah, let me know what you think.